I request that Honorable Kasuka Mutukwa, can you please ensure that your camera is lying on the other side, please? The landscape side, not it's portrait as it is now. Switch it to landscape, please. Thank you very much. Can I also remind honorable members that we request that you please ensure that the picture that you give us, we have your whole face and the shoulders appearing on the screen, in order to ensure that we do not put your name just above your mouth, because if you are slouching like this and your name is going to appear somewhere here, so we request that we have your shoulders at least showing, so that the name can appear right about here, just below. And also ensure that there are these two spaces on the side are clear. That is where we're going to put the logo of the broadcast medium that we are using. And also in instances where we use hashtags, that's where the hashtags will go. So please ensure that there is space around your face and your shoulders are in the picture. Thank you very much. Honorable Chita Musena, you are a little bit low. Tikopa o ulugisa camera nyani.
Low to what extent? Like,
thank you.
What do you mean low?
You are sitting like this. Usaili hanyani. Usaili swasha wanyani. Your onion hanyani. Yes. Much better. Yes.
Okay.
That's much better. Thank you. Thank you.
Morning.
Thanks, Honorable Mendes.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, ma'am.
How are you?
I'm all right. How are you, ma'am?
Good, good.
I think you are properly framed. It's just that you are sitting towards the side of the camera. Is it possible for you to be centered? Because once you start talking and you move and you're on the side, part of your body is going to be out of the picture. So we try to avoid that, so that when you move around, you're still in the picture.
Tell me, where should I go now?
No, you're okay now.
All right.
You're okay now.
Oh,
Thank
thanks.
you. Honorable Kasuka Mutukwa, is it possible to change your camera position around, please, to make it landscape? Much better. That is much better. But I'm not sure if you can put it down somewhere and we are able to see your picture properly. That's a little bit better. Thank you very much, sir. Honorable Raymond, we need you to switch your camera around, please, to be landscape, not portrait.
You don't see me well?
You are squashed into the picture and it's like this. You know, there's no space around you, so we need you to switch it around. Instead of the camera looking like this, put it like this. This is the horizontal if you are using a mobile device. That is much better. That is much better. Yes. Let's make it on the landscape side. Thank you.
Left.
Are there other honorable members that are on the platform who have not switched on their cameras? Luzila, can you assist? I have a minute to get this right.
I know that Sales mentioned that they were in a meeting. I see Mauritius.
Are there any who have not switched on their cameras that are here?
I think that's it for now. Tanzania.
Honorable Raymond did switch on the camera and we
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, thank you very much. As I indicated earlier on, this session is going to be broadcast live on Parliament TV, which is found on DSTV channel 408. So we request you to please ensure that all the time when you take to the platform, you switch on your video, and you can switch it off. You can switch it off when you are not taking the platform. and that happened also for the microphone. Please switch off when you are not on the platform so that we avoid any interference. We are also going to live stream the session on various social media platforms of the SADC PF, which is Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Sorry. Also on the Parliament of South Africa social media platforms. We request you to please bear that in mind, that this session is going to be live broadcast on those platforms. For those honorable members and participants who are on the platform, please remember that there's interpretation available, as the session is going to be conducted on 3 languages of the SADC region, which is English, French, and Portuguese. You have options to choose the language of your preference at the bottom of the screen. Follow the area that's got interpretation, and then you can choose your preferred language there, so that you can follow the proceedings correctly. I think that's it for us from the side. Over to you, Lizella. Thank you very much, honorable members, for your assistance.
Honorable Shali, you may go ahead, please.
Good morning, all. Honorable members, Secretary General, distinguished guests, I greet all and thank you for joining us to this meeting. Today, we are coming together to discuss what it means to strengthen productive capacities in the face of COVID-19 pandemic for African women in the SADC region. We have entered a time where SADC member states are being encouraged to accelerate the implementation of the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan 2020 to 2030. And this strategic plan is a guide for member states to leverage areas of excellence and implement priorities to achieve sustainable and inclusive socioeconomic development, removing the barriers in order to deepen integration. This plan puts emphasis on industrialization and market integration in order to achieve the ambitious vision of economic growth that aim at ensuring economic well-being, improvement of standards of living and quality of life, freedom and social justice, and peace and security to the people of the region. On the other side of this ambitious regional economic strategy is the fact that across the region, there's a low level of female participation in industrialization. SADC women continue to be part of the poor and informal sector, mainly due to high level of illiteracy, limited access to productive resources, and discriminatory laws. And this status was further accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Women in SADC have limited abilities to benefit from the SADC industrialization strategy. In most parts of the region, women are at disadvantage due to the exclusive from value chains and their limited capacity to take advantage of productive opportunities within industrialization and market integration. The pandemic poses numerous challenges to the implementation of the strategy, but on the other hand, it also represents a unique opportunity for a deeper collective response to the challenges. Today, we come together to begin to think about the challenges that women in the region may face in the context of creation of this sustainable industry-focused workforce in SADC. In order to conceptualize our discussion, we decided to look at the challenges from the perspective of social protection, which represents the range of policies and programs needed to reduce the consequences of poverty and exclusion. We are looking for what kind of social protection policies need to be put in place in order to protect women's employability in this eminent economic environment that is being created. Honorable members, distinguished guests, to build upon efforts to ensure economic empowerment of women in the region, SADC recently developed a region multidimensional women's economic empowerment program, which was approved by the Ministries of Women Affairs and Gender in Windhoek in May 2019. Women are always included in the group of people who are more often disproportionately affected by a lack of coverage of inadequate level of protection. Social protection represents a crucial and required condition in order to achieve robust and inclusive economy. The empowerment program aims to broaden the impact of economic empowerment of women through concrete actions at the regional and national level that will accelerate realization of the benefits of regional integration and industrialization among both women and men in the region. The empowerment program will thus guide the region in reviewing, amending, and developing laws that provide for equal access to wage employment, decent work, and social protection, all of which are fundamental to promoting socio-economic empowerment. Honorable members, distinguished guests, the legislative reality is that most of the SADC member states do not have legal frameworks that recognize the multiple roles of women or ease the burden of those roles, hence limiting the participation of women in other livelihood enhancing tasks. This meeting will help by providing us with legal tools available to us so that through our constitutional mandates, we may work to advocate for and create legislation that may enable more women with the capacity to get and remain employed in this ever-changing regional economic environment and job market. The potential of women's participation in the labor market and in economic growth is undeniable but for women economic contribution to be sustainable, SADC parliaments must carefully evaluate existing and create context-sensitive labor and social protection policies focusing on women workers that may allow women to access resources, gain and retain employment, not being forced to sacrifice any sexual and productive rights. Failure to provide women with solid social protection systems is equivalent to self-inflicted economic sabotage. I hope we can all gain something from today's deliberations, and once again, thank you for choosing to join this discussion. God bless us all. God bless Africa. I now declare the meeting open. Dear members, I've taken advantage of the power and the advantage of the network, since it's okay now, to do the opening remarks before I'm in trouble with the network. So please bear with me and take it that because of network problem, I could not carry on with so many words, but first open the meeting and then we carry on. May I now call the secretariat to carry us through with the remaining timetable, please. Thank you.
Good morning, honorables. Thank you very much, Vice Chair Shadi, for the opening remarks. Kabeli, may we have the agenda, please? Share the screen.
Nusa,
Yes.
do you have it? Can you share it?
I cannot.
We've just given you permission.
Let me open the document then.
I now invite the Caucus Secretary, Mrs. Fernandez, to present the credentials of delegates and confirm the quorum for the meeting, please.
Yes, ma'am. We have Tanzania, Angola, Lesotho, Mauritius, Mozambique, South Africa, Seychelles.
Thank you. Honorable members, the draft agenda for the meeting was circulated to all members. However, we will not share on the screen an update version of the agenda. Are there any proposals to amend the draft agenda? Any hand up? Show of hands. If not, then may I invite members who are present now to move the adoption of the agenda, please.
I move, Honorable Chair.
Any support? Did I hear?
Excuse me, Honorable, can you please say it again?
Thank you. I invited members, any of you, to move the adoption of the agenda, to move a motion for the adoption of the agenda.
And I have moved, Honorable Chair. I moved for the adoption of the agenda.
Thank you so much. The agenda is accordingly adopted.
Honorable, we need a seconder, please.
South Africa is seconding.
Thank you, South Africa. Honorable, we may go on to the minutes now.
Honorable members, we shall now consider the minutes to confirm if they are correct record of the meeting. We shall consider the minutes item by item to accommodate any differences in pages across the languages. We have more than one language, English, French, and the pages are different in different languages. I'm giving you time to go through the minutes, please.
Honorable Chair, on the first page, I wish to make a submission.
We don't hear
I
you
wish
well.
to make a submission on the first page, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, thank you. Secretary, please take note.
Actually, page one, the very first page is just on my names. Kindly include, see down the surname. Tapang Tita Mosena. Thank you, Chair.
Which number is your name, please?
That would be number 3, Chair.
On Sepang Mosena.
Yes, it should be
Those who
Tapang
are
Tita
present.
Mosena.
Secretary,
Noted, Honorable.
thank you. Thank you so much, Mosena. And sorry. Then we go to page 2. I'm having in my hand, I'm holding the English copy. Now I don't know the other one in French. Anything in page 2, please? We go to page 3.
Yes, Chair. I wish to make another submission, Chair.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just on the very first paragraph, the first sentence, Honorable Mosena stated that since March 2020, Lesotho had been experiencing increasing cases of gender-based violence, full stop, not gender-based violence cases.
Okay, gender-based violence. Second. Thank you very much.
Noted, Honorable.
The second sentence, Chair.
Yes.
That very same first part, she brought to light the fact that more cases were currently receiving attention did not. That needs redrafting.
Secretary, did you get it?
Noted, Honorable.
Noted. We beg your pardon, Honorable. Pardon us. Honorable Mosena,
Chair?
will you please repeat?
Oh my goodness. Yes, Chair?
Will you please repeat what you just mentioned on the adjustment?
Okay, Chair. I was saying the second paragraph, the second sentence rather, she brought to light the fact that more cases were currently receiving attention did not necessarily mean. She brought to light the fact that more cases that were receiving attention did not necessarily. That's the redrafting that's possibly needed, Chair.
Thank you. Taken. Now we go to page 4. On page 4, we have the Zimbabwe and DRC. We go to page 5. Mm, mm. We go to page 6.
I have a question, Chair, just for clarity. On page 6, should I proceed, Chair?
Please, carry on.
Thank you. On the paragraph on health and healthcare services, the very first sentence, it has pandemic in a capital P. I'm just wondering, is that for
Will you please
emphasis?
start the whole sentence?
The paragraph that's titled Health and Healthcare Services. The first sentence, the study looked at access and quality of healthcare services, and even though both women and men's access to health and healthcare was affected by the pandemic. Now the question is on the letter, the P on the pandemic, which is a capital. I'm just asking if it's a capital for emphasis, or is that it needs to be a small p? That's just a question for clarity.
It depends, but then if it was just a word, then it is small p. You're right. Thank you. Is that okay for Secretariat? Secretariat?
I am right here, ma'am. I am right here.
Okay, you got it, yeah?
Yes, yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we go to education, and then we move to page 7, please.
Before page 7, Chair,
Yes.
under education, the very last, can you go back? Can we go back to page 6, please? Otherwise, I'll have to open
We're
my.
still on page 6.
Thank you. On page 6, the very first sentence. No, I'm sorry. The second sentence, which is the last paragraph on the page. The study recommended that cash transfers. I'm not sure if the sentence is packed or it needs presentation. Like when you read it out, the study recommended that cash transfers, bursaries, and other incentives for girls to continue in school, like curriculums targeting girls' interests, as well as sexual education to protect them from sexual exploitation, must be implemented. My question is, I'm not sure if it's clear for everybody, but I felt it was maybe packed. I'm not sure if I'm reading it well. Thank you, Chair.
I've heard you well. I hope the Secretariat is there. Did we miss any words, please, Secretariat?
No, I understand what Honorable Mosena is saying, and it just needs redrafting.
Okay, thank you very much for your prompt response. Honorable Mosena, take it that it's going to be corrected.
Thank you, Chair.
We go to page 7. We move to page 8. Oh, you have something, Honorable? Welcome. We are still on page 7. It's okay? Okay. We'll go to page 8. We move to page 9, which is the last page. And this is on closing remarks. Honorable members, together with the corrections made, may I now invite any of you to move the adoption of the minutes motion.
I move, Chair. I move for the adoption.
Thank you. Any to second?
Angola apoia a adoção da agenda, senhora presidente.
I had the Angola seconding the motion. Having said that, I declare the minutes are duly adopted. Honorable members, are there any matters arising from the minutes? I'm listening from you. Secretariat, please guide me.
You may go on, ma'am.
If there are no matters arising in record, I invite the honorable members to bring up.
There are no matters, Honorable. We can move on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Before we move on, Honorable Chair, just on the issue of matters arising, I wish to raise a point of note that I think it makes the meetings more fruitful if the Secretariat tries to apprise us on the developments or try to make preparations or follow-ups for the meetings so that at least when we get on to the details of matters arising, we have some reporting to do. Otherwise, it seems like the meetings are sort of futile. We get into meetings, we have discussions, we have plans, but there's nothing to report on in the following meetings, even if it's just to state that certain aspects have been heeded to and, but just to give us a highlight of what has been happening in line with the previous meeting, because my understanding is we meet to have plans, we discuss so that there are follow-throughs. So I would strongly recommend that this item of matters arising, it shouldn't always pass without any comments, at least from the Secretariat. I submit. Thank you, Chair.
I take it very seriously, Honorable Mosena, and I'm sure the Secretariat have heard us. It's about 3 months now since this meeting was held, and now when we came to matters arising, nothing is being reported. So I agree with you, but I believe maybe they've taken things in record. They will also report later because they've been very active, connecting us, getting in touch here and there. And I request other members of Parliament to keep on forwarding their comments on matters arising. Thank you. Any comment, Secretariat?
Duly noted, ma'am. No comments.
Thank you very much. Having finished everything about the previous meeting, which was held on 17th of June, 2021, together with the corrections and whatever had been discussed later, may I now say that we have taken the minutes about as record and they will be forwarded to all of us. Thank you. Honorable members, today we are going to hold this discussion on new item, and they are now on number 6.
Yes, ma'am.
If I'm right, Secretariat, I'm now going
Yes.
to invite Mr. Kromako. Is that so?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Honorable members, I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Kromako, Social Protection Specialist from ILO, based in Geneva, to give us the first part of his presentation on the international labor standards and give us an explanation on how ILO conventions can be used as tool to eliminate gender inequalities and discrimination in the workplace. We'll be diving into the realm of social protection. Other partners should also make their presentation. Welcome. But before you come aboard, I'm sure Secretariat is going to give us your CV. Secretariat, please.
Ma'am, would
Yes.
we would like to allow Mr. Krom to tell us a bit about himself before he starts the presentation. And please also indicate which one of the 2 presentations he sent us he would like us to share on the screen.
Very good. Thank you for your guidance.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Good morning, honorable members of the national SADC parliaments. It is a pleasure to be with you today for this address, focusing on international labor standards and women's rights, and how to use the standards as enablers for sound, sustainable, and economic social development with a focus on gender equality and social protection. On my part, as I was invited to share some some insights on my itinerary and professional background. My name is Krum Markov. I will be talking to you on the articulation of employment protection, labor protection, and how this needs to be compensated with sound social protection systems and measures. I have been working with the ILO for now 20 years, initially in the International Labour Standards Department, and focusing on conventions dealing with workers' rights, and in particular those on the social security and social protection. Now, for the last 5 years, I've been working with the ILO Social Protection Department at the headquarters in Geneva, where I'm focusing on policy and legal reforms, and providing assistance to member states in these respects. So I will be focusing first on the presentation that will be a bit of a general introduction to what is coming next, which will be the focus on social protection. So the first presentation, normally you should have my name on it. It's called International Labour Standards and Women's Rights. So this is the one that needs to be displayed by the Secretariat. So when the Secretariat is ready to display it, I will start.
Kabeli. Oh. Ronald.
Can we have the presentation, the presentation titled International Labour Standards and Women's Rights on display, please?
Yes. Ronald, are you there?
I'm here. And then you could be calling.
Yes, Ronald. Do you have him?
If that could facilitate, I could also share my screen, but I'm thinking that for reasons of translation and maybe that was why it was considered preferable to have you display the presentations in all 3 languages.
We will do it, Mr. Krum. Oh, you can go ahead, please, Mr. Krum.
Okay, so do the participants see the presentation now, or because from my side I don't see anything. I just see the names of the participants.
We don't see the presentation.
So sorry, Luciela, are you suggesting that I should be sharing my screen?
Let us go ahead and do it, Ronald. Krum, we will go ahead and do it. Please bear with me.
Okay,
Please
okay, I'm waiting. I'll wait for a sec. Yeah. Maybe I can use the second while the presentation is being displayed to introduce my colleague, Maya Stern-Plaza, who is also working at the ILO headquarters in Geneva at the Social Protection Department, and she will be making the focus, the link with social protection and focusing on the social security standards in particular. So Maya, if you want to have a few words of introduction.
Thank you, Krum. Honorable Chair and honorable parliamentary members and SADC Secretariat, it's an honor, a real honor to be here with you today on this meeting about empowering women, which is something I take very close to heart. And it will be my delight to try to make this link after my colleague Krum and after any questions you may have on his presentation, to make a little bit the link between what is the impact of certain gender inequalities that we perceive in society more generally with social protection systems, and in which way women perceive or do not perceive their human right to social security. But that will be the second part of our presentation. I see that the presentation is up, so I will mute myself now.
All right, Mr. Krum, thank you so much, Maya. Thank you, welcome. Mr. Krum, is this the right one?
Yes, it is the right one, yes,
Okay.
Thank you. So, yes, as a few words of introduction, just to explain how we divided the presentations and the reason why we divided them like that. So as you know, ILO is a standard setting agency, and it has, over the course of the 20th century and still now in the 21st, been the World Parliament of Labor, where the international labor standards have been crafted by employers, workers, and governments to to constitute a common good of what we call also the International Code of Labor. And over this continued period of 1 century and now more, the focus has been placed on virtually all the areas of that are touching on labor and the world of labor and the world of work. So the intention here is to first give you an outlook of those standards that are most closely related to gender and equality issues, and we'll be focusing on them first, because all these questions that are related to the need for women's empowerment and the lack thereof have a reflection both on first their societal issue, then they have a reflection on the world of work, and which in turn has a reflection on in the area of social protection. So all these things are related, and in order, however, to be able to grasp the complexity of it and address it on the side of social protection, it needs to be also tackled at the same time at the level of in the world of work and at the societal level. So these policies need to be implemented in conjunction, and social protection is of course one element which can help address the shortcomings and the lack of equality, the discriminations that women face in society at large, in the labor market, but also sometimes even in the social by the social protection systems themselves. So the idea here is to say we are going to look at those international labor standards which promote gender equality, which promote non-discrimination policies to be put in place, and then focus, and this will be Maya's presentation on social protection and how social protection systems can not only be gender neutral, but be gender sensitive in order to try to redress at their level what is feasible at their level to be done in order to redress these shortcomings and inequalities and discriminations. So maybe we can go to the next slide now and address the the question of what are labor standards, what are international labor standards. And here, the simple answer is we have various categories of standards. We have the conventions, which is basically what is considered as an international treaty at the international law level. These conventions can, of course, be ratified, and when they are ratified, they become legally binding. But even if they are not ratified, these conventions can be used, and in practice are being used at the national level as guidelines in order to seek legal developments, to implement reforms, and so on. Now, how are these conventions adopted? This is the same for the recommendations and the protocols, which are the other two categories of labor standards, international labor standards. They are adopted by what you see here on the right-hand side, by the International Labor Conference, which is composed of governments, employers, and workers, and they need to be adopted by these three constituents of the ILO at a majority of the two-thirds of those present. So conventions, international treaties, ratifiable, and when ratified, they create legal obligations. Now, the little sister legal instrument of the conventions are the international labor recommendations. These recommendations, they are more of what we call in law soft law instruments. That they are, in the sense that they are not open to ratification, they are not legally binding, but they provide general or technical guidelines on how national legal frameworks, national policies, and practices should be designed, should be implemented. Now, of course, recommendations do not necessarily have this as soft law instruments. They are, unlike conventions, not open to ratification, but in many cases they accompany conventions, and this is the case for very many, if not the majority of international labor standards, in which cases you have a convention on one topic and an accompanying recommendation on the same, which basically takes the subject matter further, give further insights as to how the subject matter should be regulated at the national level, how to take the protection often further, and very often you have provisions which cannot make it into the convention, which would then be integrated in the text of the accompanying recommendation of conventions. Of course, you also have standalone recommendations, and yes.
Excuse me. Unfortunately, you are not letting us know when to switch slides, so the presentation does not match what you are saying. So we need to do something to catch ourselves up, or let us know when we should.
Because there is a slide after international labor standards. What are they? There is a slide with what I'm saying: conventions, recommendations, and protocols.
This isn't then. This one, is that it?
No, maybe can you go back and go back in not in slideshow mode, but in normal mode? Just reverse yes. Can you go on slideshow in the middle of the screen there, just under the search bar? Can you see it? No. Ah, yes. Okay. And so what I said so far, I hope you were able to follow even without the PowerPoint, is that we have basically three categories of international labor standards: the conventions, that are international treaties, and when ratified they create legal obligations, but also when they are not ratified they can be used and are used in practice as guidelines to guide national reforms, to guide national legal developments. We also have the recommendations, which often accompany conventions and which are not open to ratification, but although they are not legally binding, they provide guidelines, legal, technical, on national policies, on national legislation, how to craft national legislation, but also how practices can be influenced and oriented. And the last category of standards is international labor protocols. These protocols are technically conventions, they are treaties, but they often would accompany a convention. And in order to ratify the protocol, a country would first need to have ratified the relevant convention to which the protocol is an annex. And therefore, you have seen this very recently when the Convention 29 on forced labor was added, the protocol number 29 also on trafficking issues. So maybe we can go to the next slide, and here just to give you an idea of, okay, we have these international standards. They are conventions, recommendations, and protocols. And what happens in the case of conventions and recommendations and protocols? Is there a monitoring mechanism, supervisory mechanisms to monitor their application and their implementation at the national levels? And this is the next slide. So if you could please move on to the next.
Ronald?
Yes, can you, yes. So what are the mechanisms that exist at the international level to monitor the application of international labor standards? And this is the next slide, please. Exactly, thank you. And so we have here a few various mechanisms that exist in order to monitor the application of international labor standards. First of all, with respect to the ratified conventions, we have mechanisms that are based on the regular reporting on how these standards, once ratified, they are implemented. And first, these reports, when drafted at the national level and received at the ILO, they are examined by the Committee of Experts on the application of conventions and recommendations. These reports are sent according to a reporting cycle, 3 years for the fundamental conventions, and we'll get to those with explanations of what these conventions are, and 6 years for the rest of the international labor standards. So we have a 3-year reporting cycle for 8 of the conventions considered fundamental, and 4 of the conventions that are considered priority or governance conventions, and then for all the rest, we have 6 years reporting cycle. When the Committee of Experts examines these national reports, it usually engages in a dialogue with the governments through 2 types of comments: observations that are considered most serious questions that need to be examined, but also more technical requests that are called direct requests that are examined and that form part of the report of the Committee of Experts every year. And this report is sent to the International Labour Conference every year, and out of them, every year the conference selects 25 cases of non-compliance, serious non-compliance, that are going to be examined. And this is the second element here. So the conference is composed, as you know, of governments, employers, and workers delegates. The employers and the workers are the ones who select every year the 25 cases of non-compliance that are going to be discussed in the Committee on the Application of Standards of the conference. And after the discussion, there are conclusions that are adopted in order to trigger compliance measures from the member states that have been discussed. And so this is basically the procedure that is examined at the regular reporting examined at the international level. We also have more what we call special procedures, and these special procedures are more like complaints and representations. So mechanisms that basically are based on an alleged non-compliance, and that can be triggered by employers or workers organizations against the country which has ratified an international labor standard. or even by a country. In the case of complaints, they can also be filed by another ILO member state who can file a complaint against a peer member state who has allegedly not complied with their obligations under the conventions. And the last special procedure that exists is what we call the Committee on Freedom of Association. This is a governing body committee, which is basically examining issues related to freedom of association, even in the case, and this is important, even in the case in which the conventions, the relevant conventions, have not been ratified, based on the fact that all ILO member states, due to the very belonging and membership to the organization, have an obligation to observe certain core principles and values, among which, of course, the freedom of association was considered key. And this mechanism has been set up since the 1960s within the governing body to examine violations of freedom of association principles and standards. And so this is basically the picture of what is out there at the level of the ILO, with respect to standard setting, and then the monitoring of these standards. And if we go to the next slide, you will see a few elements of what is the value added of these standards and of the supervisory bodies. And the first very obvious thing here is that they establish the basic principles and rights at work, and the objective here is to improve the working conditions worldwide and to specify the rights that are recognized by the international human rights treaties. As you know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights gave birth to two international covenants on economic, social, and cultural rights, and on civil and political rights. And these rights at work, those human rights that are related to the world of work, have been substantiated by way of the ILO standards in order to give some meat to these human rights at work. So what we often have is going to be a legal definition and concepts, and here this is very relevant in the area of gender and equality, in terms of for example, the concept of what discrimination is, being given a legal definition by Convention 111 on discrimination on employment, in employment and occupation. We have the Convention on 100 on equality of remuneration. The concept of remuneration is of course defined by Convention 100, but also more recently Convention 190 on violence and harassment at work, which defined the concept of violence and harassment, but also the concept of gender-based violence and harassment. And concept, of course, like sexual harassment, which, although it has not been defined by ILO conventions and recommendations, has been defined in the jurisprudence, so to say, of the Committee of Experts on the application of conventions and recommendations under Convention 111. Of course, we have these standards give legal definitions and expressions to these concepts, but they also set very quantitative and qualitative benchmarks for the compliance, and this is the case of the social security standards, for example, where we not only have the guiding principles of administration and financing in the social security standards, but we also have minimum benchmarks of what is the minimum level of protection that should be achieved. And here we can go on to move on to the next slide, please. So now the focus here is going to be on understanding what are these ILO, International Labour Standards on gender and equality, and what is their origin and context. And the first obvious, next please slide, the first obvious element of context is that when we talk about gender inequality, we talk about gender inequality more generally. It's not only in the world of work, because the world of work, as I said, is the reflection of what is happening out there in our societies. And often what we see when we examine the situation of women and girls is the low socioeconomic state, is their low socioeconomic status, which is often characterized by low levels of literacy, low levels of education and attainment and training, which result in limited job skills and constraints in accessing productive chains and productive assets. So all these pre-existing challenges are reflected then in the labor market. This is the subject of the next slide. All these challenges result in an overrepresentation of women in low productivity, low pay, and low protection jobs. It also results in lower wage rates and earnings, and into constraints in accessing labor market, of course, because of these low levels of education and so on. Employment of women is basically oriented towards less attractive and precarious forms of employment, but also in what we often call the non-standard forms of employment, characterized by occasional temporary work, part-time work, work in the informal economy, but also domestic work, work in the agricultural sector, and often as dependent family members within family businesses. Of course, more broadly speaking, the inequalities in societies are also due to a larger share of family responsibilities assumed by women, and with respect to children, with respect to care for the elderly, care for the sick members of the family, and so on. So all these, of course, point to an imbalance in terms of the situation out there between men and women, in terms of all the elements that we mentioned: the household responsibilities of women, the labor market challenges that are the consequence of their economic and social status very, very, very often. And next, please. To tackle all these, because this is, of course, something that we observe throughout the world in every single country that we look at, of course, at different levels, and there may be some situations, national practices, and legislations that are more advanced than others. But basically, most countries have adopted non-discrimination and equal pay provisions and national legal frameworks in order to address these challenges. However, the level at which national laws address these is sometimes suffers sometimes discrepancies, as these national legal frameworks do not necessarily protect all groups of workers, and often groups of workers that are mostly constituted of women would not be covered by certain provisions of the national legislation. The national laws and practices often do not cover certain forms of discrimination, and cover only some and not all. And we'll come to that because we have a few slides where we are focusing on what are the grounds of discrimination that are prohibited by Convention 111, ILO Convention 111, and how these reflect situations in practice. Also, national legal frameworks do not necessarily reflect all the principles that are defined internationally. And here we see that in spite of the fact that these fundamental conventions like Convention 100 on equality of remuneration or Convention 111 on discrimination in employment and occupation have been very widely ratified, we still have in many cases situations where the ILO supervisory bodies raise problems of not only of implementation, but also of conception of the national legislation, with some of the grounds of discrimination that are prohibited by international law are still basically being given, not being given recognition at the national level. And sometimes national legal frameworks allow for exceptions that are contrary to these standards. And we often have problems of application at the national level, as basically non-discrimination is a moving target and it needs to be addressed in a continuous manner, because measures create behaviors that are meant to avoid the measures, and non-discrimination measures need to continuously be adapted to the practices to avoid discrimination at the national level in an efficient way. So maybe we can go here to the next slide and focus here on what is. Can we move one slide further, because we don't have much time, I understand. So what are the main topics covered by international labor standards related to the women's rights at work? And here the idea is to give you a full picture of all the panorama of international labor standards that relate to women's rights. And of course, on the left-hand side here you see the equal pay, the equal remuneration Convention 100. The equality principle has been recognized since the 50s, and yet, as you know, in most cases, women's average remuneration is still 20% lower, even in industrialized countries today, than men's. The Convention 111 on discrimination in employment and occupation, the Maternity Protection Convention, and here we have three of them, three of 1919, 103 of 1952, and Convention 183 of 2000, and the Convention of covering workers with family responsibilities, and lately the Violence and Harassment at Work Convention 190. But of course, the fundamental, here in blue, you have the two fundamental conventions, the equal pay and discrimination. But then in the middle here, the convention, these are the other fundamental conventions on which countries need to report every 3 years. And this, of course, covers freedom of association and collective bargaining with Convention 87 and 98, but also child labor conventions, minimum age for employment, and forced labor conventions 29 and 105. Now, this is of course very related to the situation that we want to tackle discrimination in employment, because fundamental conventions often act as programmatic and enablers to women's organizations, and to unions, also to fight for better equality at work, for non-discrimination. But also these last groups here of conventions that you see, Convention 122 on employment policy, the Social Security and Social Protection Convention 102, the Labor Inspection Convention 81, the Occupational Safety and Health Convention 155, and more policy conventions such as the Informal Economy Transition from Formal to Informal, from Informal to Formal Recommendation 204, and the Peace and Resilience recommendation adopted, I think the number is wrong here, it's 205. Represent also part of these sets of measures which address which can improve women's rights in employment. And last but not least, there is a group of instruments out there that are more categorical, which address the homework convention, very sectoral conventions, with the Homework Convention 177, the Nursing Personnel Convention 149, domestic workers 189, the migrant workers, but also persons with disability, indigenous peoples, workers on plantations, and the recommendation on HIV number 200. So just to give you a little bit of an outlook of the multiplicity of international labor standards which exist and which all contain elements relevant in defending the principle of equality at work, of equality of opportunity between men and women, but also relevant in respect of the largely the non-discrimination principles. Now, if I have another 2 minutes, because I think our time is going to run out, but the next slide is going to be on provide you with a focus on what are the internationally the key 4 gender equality conventions. And of course, the group of the 4 gender equality conventions is the following: the Equality Remuneration Convention number 100, which established the principle that men and women should be paid equally not for the same work, but also for work of equal value. And this is an important concept to broaden, because as we know, men and women do not necessarily always occupy the same professions. The Convention 111 on discrimination in employment and occupation, and of course the Workers with Family Responsibility Convention 156 and the Maternity Protection Convention 183, which is the latest maternity protection instruments adopted in the year 2000. All these 4 gender equality conventions are accompanied by recommendations, as we said earlier. International labor conventions are often accompanied by recommendations which provide further insights as to how to move the subject matter forward and how to provide higher levels of protection. And these are important pieces in order to in framing the national legal frameworks and practices. And why this? And this is the next slide. Why do we need to have this conjunction, and why not have only one convention on these issues? And this is because we have, can we go to the next, please? This is because subjects cannot be seen in isolation. Yes, thank you. And in order to be effective, equality policies should cover all these issues addressed in the 4 conventions. Namely, gender pay gap is a cause and result of gender inequalities and discrimination, and needs to be, you need policies to address the gender pay gap, but at the same time, you also need to make progress to achieve equality, which requires a focus on broader societal issues, such as work and family issues also, at the more societal level. And the maternity protection element also contributes to eliminating discrimination against men and women, and promotes equality based on principles of collective financing, and not only protection that is financed by women or only by the employer, but by society at large, and so on. And this is going to be what Maya will be focusing on in the second part of the presentation, which basically relates to these employment issues, and makes the link with how social protection addresses them, and the challenges that we see from the social protection side. So I think I will stop here to give you some time to interact. And then Maya will be focusing on the social protection dimension.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markov, for such an informative presentation. I shall now open the floor for some questions, after which we will move on to the second part of the presentation. May the secretary please assist to see the show of hands. Track the
Yes.
red hand, please.
We have no hands so far, ma'am.
Okay.
In this case, maybe we can have all the questions after also the second presentation, so that we have more time to address more questions at the end.
Okay.
Great. So maybe can I, I concur with Kroom's suggestion, as that both presentations are very much linked. So could I kindly ask the Secretariat to please bring up the next presentation?
Could you give us the title of the next presentation, please?
Yeah, it should be called International Labor Standards and Women's Rights Focus on Social Protection.
Ronald, it's social protection and women's rights.
Yep, this is it. Perfect. Great. So, so again, an honor to be here with you. I'm going to dive right into it because I see we're a little bit behind time, and we would like to give you some time also to exchange. So essentially, this presentation will focus a little bit more on social protection more specifically, and how these inequalities that exist, as my colleague Kroom said, in society, in the household, how they impact social protection systems and inequalities in social protection. So here we see a little bit the issues that we will try to cover. So first, we'll look a little bit at what are the specific social protection challenges that women experience. Because of the important relevance of COVID-19 and how it brought to light many of the gaps in protection and many of these equalities, we wanted to just go into look a little bit what was the consequence of COVID-19 and what kind of information can we extract from that experience, hopefully trying to make the most of it and so that it can result in certain policy reforms. And of course, last but not least, we'll look a little bit at what is the international normative architecture that can really stand out as a tool, as a blueprint for trying to remedy some of these inequalities through social protection systems. It is worth saying that social protection is part of the solution. It's not the only solution. And that policies that are going to address gender inequalities need to be multi-sectoral. So it needs to look at, it has to be done from many various angles, from the education system, from the economy, from the social system, but also social protection. So we will focus more on social protection today, but I just wanted to mention that. So if you can go into the next slide. Thank you. So what we see, not just to talk about the negative, but I mean, globally, there have been some advances in women's enjoyment of rights. However, these gender inequalities remain a persistent phenomenon in families, in the economy, and in societies. Some of those things that my colleague Kroom brought up. If we look at the labor market specifically, and here I'm going to repeat some things that Kroom said, that this has a direct impact on how women in particular enjoy their human right to social security. When we look at the labor market, we see that women have serious issues in accessing decent work. They have, lower labor force participation rates. There are higher levels of part-time and temporary work. There are higher levels of informal employment, and basically everywhere, women still do not enjoy equal pay with men for work of equal value. And this is generally the result of the fact that women disproportionately share a higher burden of unpaid care work, but also because they are often in, the majority of these, they make up the majority of these informal workers. Now, why is this important? And here I just want to make a little parenthesis a little bit. If we think about the policy instruments that exist to realize this right to social protection, there are various ways that this can be done. And if we think about and depending on the policy instrument that you use to realize the right to social security, there are certain ways that they need to address these gender inequalities so that they don't reinforce gender inequalities. So if we think about what we call often, in the jargon of social protection system, contributory schemes, these are the schemes that are employment related, and they are financed through the contributions of workers and employers. Now, in many cases, and here you often might hear social insurance schemes. This is the other term. In many cases, women are not covered by these schemes. That's because part-time workers are not covered, and women are majoritarily working in part-time work, or temporary workers are not covered. Seasonal workers are not covered legally. And in some cases, it's a question about the fact that they work in the informal economy. By definition, workers in the informal economy are not registered with these social security insurance institutions. And therefore, when they come to the time where they need to access their social security benefit through these social insurance schemes, women are not part of the picture. There are other types of schemes, for example, those that are financed through taxes, and we'll see. Now, this is part of the solution. I'll go into this a little bit more specifically, but there also is a pitfall to these schemes that we want to look into. And the last type of scheme I wanted to talk about are the what we call employer liability schemes. And essentially, employer liability schemes are social protection systems that are fully financed by the employer. That means that if anything happens and risk, it's the employer that puts his hand in his pocket and pays out directly the benefit. The issue is that these kind of schemes tend to create a lot of gender discrimination in the labor market. Because if an employer has to put his hand in the pocket to pay out, for example, a maternity benefit, cash benefit, the employer may be less likely to want to hire women so that they don't have to put their hand in the pocket. So really the policy instrument that's used to deliver social protection has an impact on how women actually receive social protection. So I just wanted to mention this. If we look a little bit at the figures, just to give you some figures, what we see is that globally, according to ILO statistics, and these are recent statistics that were published just a few months ago, only 30.6%. Only
we don't hear you, you're muted.
Ronald, assistance?
Sorry, I think somebody muted me. It's okay, I'll continue. Did you miss all of that or just some of that? Just
we started missing you when you
yeah.
started saying 30.6%.
Okay, so globally, what we see is that 30.6% of the working age population, so men and women, are covered by comprehensive social security systems. When we say comprehensive, what we mean is that you're covered for the 9 classical risks. So you're covered in case of unemployment, you're covered in case of old age, you're covered in case of pregnancy, you're covered in case of employment injury, you're covered in case of sickness, you're covered in case of invalidity, and you're covered in case of the death of a survivor. So you would have the full coverage, and only 30.6% of the global population. But if you look specifically at women, what we see is that women coverage is lagging behind men's by 8%. So women are globally less covered for this whole package. If we look at, just to give you another figure that's very relevant to women in particular and the right to social security, if we look at the percentage of women with newborns worldwide who actually receive a cash maternity benefit. So that's the benefit you receive during the time that you're not supposed to be working for biological reasons, because you just gave birth and you need to recuperate. Only 44.9% of women actually receive a cash maternity benefit. So that's less than half. But there are huge regional disparities. So when you look at Europe, the coverage is almost universal. But if you look at Africa, for example, it's about 15%. And if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, it's about 7.5%. So we see already here, you can see real figures of these discrepancies. If we go to the next slide, please. This is just to show you that women often experience compounded discriminations because they're women, because they are mostly a part of the informal economy, because also they encompass a lot of the other vulnerable groups, such as migrants and those forcibly displaced, which means that they start accumulating vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities they experience in social protection system, but it's also the social protection systems that can be used to remedy some of these vulnerabilities. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what we've seen is that many countries have made efforts to close or at least reduce some of these coverage and adequacy gaps as a means to promote gender equality. Some examples, for example, I talked to you about employer liability schemes. Well, some countries have shifted those employer liability schemes to social insurance mechanisms that are closer, more attuned with the principles of solidarity. For example, solidarity between men and women. And there are cases like, for example, in Jordan. Other countries have put efforts into extending social security coverage. So the social insurance schemes, the coverage, there are examples in South Africa and Vietnam. And in other cases, hang on, yeah, this is fine. This slide is fine. And in other cases, we've strengthened the tax finance mechanisms. So sometimes these are called the social assistance mechanisms to try to cover women who have not been able to participate, for example, in contributory schemes because of their labor market circumstances, but they still need to have a certain protection so that they don't fall in absolute poverty. And we see examples in Mozambique. So next slide. Now I just want to do a deep dive into 3 types of social protection specific mechanisms. So pensions, so with the benefits you received in old age, then I'll look at maternity benefits, so that's the medical and the cash benefits, and finally the medical care that women receive. So as regards pension mechanisms, we see when we look globally that there has been an expansion of tax finance pensions in many parts of the world. And we can name a few countries: Kenya, Namibia, Nepal, and South Africa have all expanded these tax finance pensions mechanisms. And essentially these are essential for women who, because of these, because they're working part-time, or because they're working temporarily, or because of all the unpaid care work they're doing and they're removed from the labor market, or simply because they're always part of the informal economy, will never be able to receive a social insurance benefit. So they will, in this case, it really gives them, it guarantees at least a basic level of income security for many of these women. However, as I mentioned, while these tax finance mechanisms are essential and they need to be part of any social protection system at the national level, we should also be aware that generally they provide lower benefit levels. And also some women may still not be able to benefit due to maybe narrow eligibility criteria, or because of the fear of stigmatization, because these are sometimes called poor benefits, if you will. So for this reason, as part of generally the ILO strategy, but specifically to gender, it's very important that we build and reinforce contributory mechanisms, but through being gender sensitive, as Kroom said, right? So if we have gender responsive contributory pensions that are based on the principles of collective financing and solidarity, then we can really play a key role in providing women with adequate pension coverage. And to do this, these are 2 examples, but this can mean, for example, for pension systems to include something that we call care credits, which are essentially, we credit the years that women have been taking on or shouldering unpaid care work so that they can be included in the calculation of the years that they're required, those eligibility criteria, to actually be able to be entitled to the pension. Because in many cases, women, since they're in the labor market and out of the labor market often, they can accumulate the number of years necessary to be allowed to have a pension. So this is something that we see a lot, and we see it growing a lot. And this is not gender unequal, this is gender sensitive, taking into consideration the realities that exist and trying to address them through the social protection mechanism. The other mechanism that these contributory pension schemes could include is including a minimum pension. So ensuring that no matter what is your salary base that you've contributed on, or the years you've contributed on, you are entitled at least to a minimum pension. Next slide, please. If we look more closely at maternity benefits, so we looked a little bit, we did the deep dive into the pensions, now we'll do the deep dive into the maternity benefits and childcare. What we see, and I already gave you some of the figures, is, despite the importance of maternity cash benefits and maternity health care, both for ensuring the health and the well-being of women and the babies, many women do not have access to these kind of benefits, especially those, as we said, that are in vulnerable forms of employment or that are self-employed. And so some of the policy instruments here that can try to address some of these issues, aside from extending the coverage of the existing maternity benefits so that we really cover all women in all forms of employment. We see also that the introduction of paternity leave and gender equitable parental leave also contributes to greater involvement of fathers in child rearing. Because as I said, social protection mechanisms can address some of the gender inequalities, but there are also other policies that need to take place to really change sometimes the mind frame with regards to, for example, child rearing. And these kind of benefits, paternity leave and parental leave, can really remedy indirectly some of those discrepancies and encourage men to take up, for example, some time to take care of the child. Now, in many cases where they haven't stored these parental leaves, often we see women taking up these rights and not men. So some countries, what they're doing now is that they divide the parental leave into two portions. And if the man decides not to take up the parental leave, then they lose it entirely. You can't transfer it to the women. So sometimes these kind of measures do incite some gender inequality in the unpaid care work. At the same time, it's very important to ensure that there's sustained investment in affordable and good quality childcare, because this will also allow women to return to the labor market. And again, this is from another perspective. So it's important for policymakers and development partners to consider exactly how these child-oriented policies can be better designed and implemented to serve both the needs of children and of women. Next slide, please. And finally, just to look a little bit at a deep dive into social health protection. Now, while we see a lot of progress in the area of social health protection for women, with a number of countries prioritizing the provision of free and more easily affordable, good quality prenatal and postnatal care, we still see that the inclusion of reproductive health needs as part of essential service packages, health packages, tends to be a bit selective, and they often ignore reproductive rights of adolescent girls and older women. So it's important that social health protection take into consideration these barriers. And depending on the national context and the employment status and the contributed capacity and the extent of which societal norms allow, that women can make decisions with regards to their own health. In addition, if we look at coverage gaps, for example, coverage gaps in long-term care provision, and this is becoming a very hot topic, long-term care, because of the aging population, we see that this disproportionately affects women, who both make up a bigger share of those who need care, since women tend to live longer than men, but also they're the ones who are burdened with this additional unpaid care work. So not only are they taking time out of work to care for children, but they're also taking time out of work to care for older family members. And obviously this will impact their participation in paid employment, which will impact their access to adequate social protection. So overall, what we see is there are persistent gender gaps, both in the reach and in the adequacy of social protection coverage, which call effectively for more gender responsive social protection policies. And these need to be, in the case of social health protection, these need to be complemented by efforts to ensure the availability, the accessibility, and the quality of public services, such as childcare and long-term care provision. Can you please go to the next slide? Now, as I promised, it's very interesting to see the impact of the pandemic and how it served to shine a light on some of these inequalities generally, but also within social protection. Next slide, please. So when we look at the COVID-19 crisis, we see that women have been affected by employment loss much more than men. And more women have been leaving the workforce more than men. But perhaps this is also, we think, as a result of the intensified unpaid care workloads. So the fear is that some of the gains that are made in gender equality over the recent decades are being reversed because of the pandemic. And to a large extent, the pandemic's uneven effect have also compounded pre-existing gender inequalities that we've already mentioned. And what we see is that women have effectively been more adversely affected by the decline in employment compared to men. But this may also be because some of the sectors in which women are employed have been the hardest hit by the shutdown. So if we think about, for example, the tourism sector or the textile industry. In addition to that, women, as we said, they already work in economic sectors that are characterized by relatively weak social security coverage. We can think of, for example, domestic workers, the agricultural sector, the construction sector. And this is because often these sectors are associated with informal work, they're associated with part-time work, temporary work, seasonal work, and often also with migration. So migration compounds the discrimination that women already experience. What we also see is that many women, while many women's economic activity has been halted, many others have seen their workloads increased. And here we're talking specifically about unpaid care work. Here we're talking specifically of certain sectors. So while certain sectors have been, like the textile sector and the tourism sector, have been impacted in the negative, certain sectors where women are overly represented, and in particular the health workforce, their workloads have been increased and intensified. And as a figure, just to let you know, women comprise 70% of the health workforce. And during the pandemic, they were the large majority of the frontline workers. And many had to work with inadequate personal protective equipment, which also heightened their risk of exposure. In some ways, the same can be said about domestic workers. Some cases, domestic workers completely lost their employment. In other cases, they were requested to work more and in not necessarily the safest conditions. And as we know, women make up the vast majority of domestic workers, about 77%. So we see that the COVID-19, the pandemic, has just compounded the inequalities that already existed, but have also brought to light the coverage gaps in social protection systems. Next slide, please. If we look specifically at pregnant women in the pandemic has unfortunately adversely affected childbearing women, both because they have an increased risk of losing their employment. For example, those working in the informal economy due to shutdowns and sometimes very strict quarantines. People were not even allowed out of their houses. But also by raising certain barriers to pre and postnatal care because of the disruptions in the healthcare system. And in some cases, the lack of income security and social security coverage during the final stages of pregnancy have forced many women to continue working, even though this can adversely affect their health and the health of children. And in the other case where they haven't been able to work, this has just increased the risk of them falling into poverty because of the loss of income. And that risk is also exacerbated. This risk of falling into poverty has also been exacerbated by some women due to the lack of social health protection access, or the fact that to access social health protection, there is a cost, out-of-pocket payments. So this increases the risk of poverty for women who are pregnant, who still needed to access healthcare mechanisms. Next slide, please. And I'll finish this COVID part with this one. If we look at the country responses to COVID-19 more broadly, and the impact on women and children, what we can say most definitely is that the responses, both from the jobs and social protection perspective, have essentially been gender blind. Of 1,340 social protection measures that have been identified, only 23% could be considered to be gender sensitive. Half of these aimed at strengthening women's economic security and the other half at supporting unpaid care work. So essentially most countries, so 1/3 of high income countries, did not implement any policies specifically aimed at supporting children through the crisis. And only about 2% of all the fiscal response that was provided in these high income countries was earmarked for child specific social protection policies. And if we look at maternity protection specifically, this has received also very little attention in the COVID-19 response. So while the COVID-19 response exacerbated the inequalities that already existed in the labor market and in society, and put the limelight on some of the vulnerabilities that women experience and made them even more vulnerable, the actual measures that were adopted at the government level did not address, in large part, whether it be women or children. Next slide, please. So essentially, we see that these inequalities that exist in society have a direct impact on how women access social protection and whether that access to social protection is adequate. So it's very important, as we mentioned, that in the design of the social protection systems, that these considerations, these inequalities be addressed by ensuring that social protection systems are implemented in a gender sensitive way. So how can states implement gender sensitive social protection systems that are also in line with the human right to social protection, but the standards that have been developed by the international community to implement these comprehensive social protection systems? And this is why we turn to the standards that have been developed by the ILO. So my colleague Kroom spoke a little bit about the whole umbrella of international labor standards that address different aspects of gender. But I'm going to look at more specifically the international labor standards that have been developed to ensure that people have access to their human right to social security. More generally, these are not necessarily women gender specific, since the human right belongs inherently to every human being, whether they're female or male. But it is important that these systems not only be developed in their comprehensiveness, and I'll explain what that means, but also with this gender sensitivity in mind. Please go to not the next slide, but the other slide, the one with the house. The next, yeah, this one. This is just to show you that when we talk about ILO's main standards, the standards that have been developed at the ILO in the field of social security, these are the main instruments that we're talking about. And for us, they represent a little bit of a house of social security. What we see is at the bottom, which is the last instrument that has been developed, it's recommendation 202, which is the social protections floor recommendation, which was the instrument that basically gave an internationally agreed definition of what is a social protection floor and what's its purpose. Above that is reference to Convention 102. This is the landmark Social Security Convention, ILO Social Security Convention. It is a convention from the 1950s, but it still today is very relevant as it sets out the very definition of what social security is, and also sets out the minimum parameters of what a minimum protection should look like for every single branch of social security. And then above these, we have what we call higher standards or more advanced standards, which have been developed on the basis of Convention 102, but they sort of up the volume, if you will, in terms of that level of protection. And essentially, these were developed for states that have more advanced social protection systems, so they keep hiring the bar. Please go to the next slide. This is a representation illustration of what the ILO strategy is for extending social protection, because as I said, only 30.6% of the global population actually has comprehensive access to social protection. So it's an issue for women, but it's an issue for everybody. And so there was already a realization in the early 2000s that we needed a new instrument to help guide states and social partners in closing those coverage gaps. And its recommendation this was the reason why recommendation 2 was adopted. And essentially this recommendation sets out a strategy on how to close those coverage gaps. And what we see here is an illustration of that strategy. On the horizontal dimension, we see the reference to the social protection floor. So essentially what this means is that everybody as a member, as society, but in particular residents and children, should have access to at least essential healthcare and minimum income security when in need. And this is the definition of the floor. So everybody through the life cycle should have access to essential healthcare and minimum income security for all. And progressively, we should ensure higher levels of protection according to those benchmarks that have been established, both in Convention 102, but also in the higher conventions. So here you see this strategy that has this horizontal and vertical dimension, but depicted also with the conventions, as these instruments, in fact, are there to serve as a blueprint for the states to try to develop and improve their social protection systems. Next slide, please. This is let's say a further definition of what we mean by the social protection floor. Here's a further illustration. When we talk about social protection floor, what do we mean? We talk essentially about guaranteeing at the national level and according to national circumstances, a nationally defined social protection floor that includes 4 guarantees. Those 4 guarantees are access to a set of goods and services constituting essential healthcare, including maternity care, and this is specified in the instrument as deemed something very important. Then basic income security for children, for persons in active age who are unable to earn sufficient income, and finally for persons of old age who should no longer be working. And these 4 guarantees at a minimum are what comprises a social protection floor, the concept of social protection floor. But it's very important that these are defined at the national level and according to national circumstances, so that they be most relevant, since no 2 countries are alike and there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Next slide. I'm going to pass some of these slides. This is just to show you that when we talk about the vertical dimension, as I already said, we do it with reference. I'll be done. Yeah, I'll be done in 2 minutes. We do it with reference to Convention 102. And in Convention 102, we often talk about the branches of Social Security. So this is our Social Security tree with the different branches of Social Security. These are the different risks that the social protection system should be covered. Next slide. This is just I'll end with this. This is just a question. Has your country, is your state party to Convention 102? I'm not sure if you know or not. We can go to the next slide. Convention 102, this landmark convention that establishes very much what the human right, the basis of the human right to Social Security, has been ratified by 59 states since its adoption in 52. Next slide. And here's a list of countries that have adopted it. Now, what we see is, despite maybe not having universal coverage, this convention has had an impact much beyond the ratifications, since it has been the blueprint of the development of many social protection systems. Kroom and I in our work, we continue to use it as our benchmark when we support countries both in their policy reforms, but also in their legal reforms. So even countries that haven't necessarily ratified and that would be in a position to ratify have still used it as a basis. But these are the countries that have ratified, in case you would like to identify yours. And as you see, we've mapped them by region. Now I'll end here. I just want to mention one last thing before we open for questions and answers. I think my colleague Kroom will share with you a link to a toolkit that we have developed on ILO standards specific to social protection, on their importance, on what's in them. There's even a quiz. There's this map of the ratifications, and there we have a lot of documentation that covers a whole set of information about the principles of Convention 102, the different instruments. And this toolkit is also available in 6 languages. So it's available in English, but also in French, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Arabic, and in Russian. So almost every language. And I will end here so that we still have a little bit of time for any questions that you may have. And I apologize if I rush through this. I can go back to anything if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for giving us this good presentation. And I'm sure most of us was following up. So I now open the floor for the second discussion, and this will also include the first one. We may keep the 2 presentations together. Any questions? And the presenters are there to answer, and if you have any suggestion, welcome members. May the caucus secretary track the raised hand, please. Do you hear me?
Yes, I am here, ma'am. I am tracking, giving the honorable members time to raise their hands if they want to. I see that Honorable Maria Nascimento from Angola has her hand up. She wants to speak.
Welcome,
Yes,
Maria. Please.
Yes, please. Thank you, President. Eu começo por felicitar a senhora Maia e o senhor Markov pelas apresentações que fizeram. São bastante elucidativas e ajudam-nos a perceber determinadas coisas que possivelmente não estavam no nosso conhecimento. Eu gostaria de fazer a pergunta à senhora Maia. Por exemplo, eu vejo aqui a lista dos países. Não sei se estes países já ratificaram ou se ainda não ratificaram. E os países que, porventura, não tenham sequer essa convenção ou não tenham ratificado, o que é que devem fazer para obtê-la? E em relação ao senhor Markov, eu gostaria de dizer que nós temos a Convenção 190, creio que é sobre o assédio sexual no local de trabalho, e que estamos a preparar uma discussão com os sindicatos e também com a sociedade civil para depois podermos propor a sua ratificação. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Honorable. Honorable Shali, we have a raised hand from Honorable Talita from Botswana.
Welcome, Honorable Talita.
Thank you, and thank you for the very good presentation, and which is very touchy and very emotional to us as women. What I can say is that as a member of parliament, we are making policies for the people to follow, or for the government and for the ruling government to follow. But what I can say is that we have realized that COVID has shown us that as women, we are, we can go through hardship. But as women, we have realized that we are disadvantaged and unemployment is too high on us because most of men are going for the for the mines job. And most of the women, they go to the farms, they do tourism business. They are.
Botswana.
Yes. Yeah. They, you know, they do lowest paid jobs. You know, most of them, they do the least work you can think about it. And what we have to do as members of parliament is that we have to have policies which have to empower women. Because if we don't empower women, women are going to suffer. That's what I've realized. That's what we have to make. We can talk and talk of women, and we can talk of disadvantage of women, and we can talk of hardship of what women are going through. But at long last, as members of parliament, women, we have to make policies which at least can make the women live, especially for employment, especially for medical care. So these things, we can really look after that. And especially for maternity, if you look at the policy for Botswana, in my country, it's only women who goes for maternity leave, not the men. There's no paternity. There's no paternity. Men are not going for the maternity leave, which means it's only women who looks after the children or after the kids. So we have to make that policy for the men and women to go for the maternity and for paternity leave. So these things, I think we have really learned a lot from you, which is very, very good. I think also COVID, we have learned a lot from COVID, what we are going through as women, especially when it comes to unpaid work. So these things, we have seen that, and we have, you know, and we have to go through that, and we have to solve that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Honorable,
and we've heard you well.
We have a hand from Honorable Emmeline from Madagascar.
Welcome, Honorable Emily.
Oui, bonjour à tous. Concernant l'autonomisation des femmes dans une main-d'œuvre durable, axée sur l'industrie dans la SADC, un accent sur la protection sociale. Là, je voudrais parler un peu de Madagascar pendant la pandémie. Madagascar est parmi les pays touchés par la pandémie de la COVID-19. Les secteurs de l'emploi souffrent suite à cette pandémie.
Honorable, just a second, please. I'm sorry. Translation to English. Go on, please, Honorable.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Madagascar est parmi les pays touchés par la pandémie de la COVID-19. Les secteurs de l'emploi souffrent suite à cette pandémie. Face à ce problème, et parmi tant d'autres aides sociales, le gouvernement de Madagascar, avec l'appui du Fonds de la Banque mondiale pour les plus pauvres, IDA, effectue des programmes de protection sociale à travers les transferts monétaires réguliers au profit des plus de 80 000 ménages pauvres, tout en promouvant la nutrition, le développement de la petite enfance l'assiduité scolaire des élèves et les activités productives des familles pauvres. Plus de 75% des bénéficiaires de ces allocations sont des femmes. Les premiers rapports font état d'une amélioration de la fréquentation scolaire qui est passée à 97%. Je vous remercie.
Secretariat, we need the translation, please. I did not want to disturb her.
Do we have French interpretation?
Yes, we do. Mr. Nkulu, can you kindly summarize that, please?
Why are we not having simultaneous interpretation?
He was muted the whole time. I was trying to get him unmuted.
Oh. So, should she repeat? You didn't tell us that she's muted, but the rest.
No.
Yes.
The interpreter was muted.
The interpreter was muted. Now what do we do?
Mr. Nkulu?
Secretariat, guide me, please.
Mr. Nkulu, can you kindly summarize?
If it is not interpreted, then we cannot respond to it. Most of us who are English speaking. Okay, let us make progress while Secretariat is still working on it. Any other show of hands, please?
We may go on with perhaps Maya and Krum from ILO.
But before we proceed to that,
je crois que c'est tout, hein?
May one of you inform her that you are working on it?
Yes, we
Portuguese, we can hear you, we cannot hear French.
I know. Even myself, I'm waiting for the interpretation. Even the
chair is also muted.
Chair muted? I'm on.
Okay, now we can hear you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I was just explaining that since the rest of the members did not get the interpretation from French to English, then Secretariat may work on it. Meanwhile, we can take another hand.
As instructed, please kindly proceed.
Vous voulez que je refais mon intervention, s'il vous plaît?
Yes, please kindly proceed.
Oui, je vais refaire. Oui, d'accord. Madagascar est parmi les pays touchés par la pandémie de la COVID-19. Les secteurs de l'emploi souffrent suite à cette pandémie. Face à ce problème et parmi tant d'autres aides sociales, le gouvernement de Madagascar, avec l'appui du Fonds de la Banque mondiale pour les plus pauvres, effectue des programmes de protection sociale à travers des transferts monétaires réguliers au profit de 80 000 ménages pauvres, tout en promouvant la nutrition, le développement de la petite enfance, l'assiduité scolaire des élèves et les activités productives des familles pauvres. Plus de 75% des bénéficiaires de ces allocations sont des femmes. Les premiers rapports font état d'une amélioration de la fréquentation scolaire qui est passée à 97%. Voilà. Je vous remercie.
Honorable Shali, you may go on now.
Thank you. I was waiting for the interpretation for us, for the rest of us. What did Madam just say? Honorable just said? Secretariat? Are we together?
Yes,
Hello?
we can.
Catherine, kindly continue.
Hello?
Is Chair able to hear the interpretation?
Yes, please.
We can hear you, Dolphin. Kindly continue.
Oh, the rest of you have heard it. So why didn't I not hear it?
Chair, you were not connected to the interpretation.
Okay.
You have all the interpretations off. That's why.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps someone can help
I'll
you
get
connect.
it in writing.
Okay,
I'll
perfect.
get it in writing.
Thank
in
you,
the
Chair.
minute, maybe. If the member of parliament is comfortable, then we proceed. We'll get it in the minutes. Okay? Any other show of hand?
No hands, ma'am.
Okay. Myself, I have few concerns. The ILO has done a good work on setting the international labor standards on social security and particularly on women inclusion. Most of the international labor standards are not in application because of non-ratification. The problem is long-standing, especially in Africa. Are there any new strategies to address it? I'm asking the first presenter. Are they thinking, or are you thinking of compulsory and automatically applying international labor standards on critical areas, including this of women rights to social security? Secondly, most of the international labor standards are non-binding. This means that they provide guidance rather than being binding norms. Why don't you think of pursuing women issues from the human rights perspectives? And finally, it's just a suggestion, they may as well correct me. In the SADC sub-region, the problem of coverage in social protection for women is apparent, meaning that it's obvious. SADC has opted for measures including the adoption of the protocol on employment and labor, which recognizes decent work for all and social protection for workers and their dependents. The measures are for workers and their dependents. Myself, I argue that we familiarize ourselves with the protocol and utilize the opportunities. But then it is taking too much time. I mean, it's slow. Any assistance from ILO? Thank you. May I now take this opportunity to thank all the previous presenters, and having heard from them, I'm waiting for response from them. I welcome the presenters for a few minutes. Mr. Markov, please. You're welcome.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thanks for all the comments all of you made so far. Maybe I can start backwards. I mean, with the Chair's question, that was probably the more encompassing one. I believe you're right. We always say ILO has adopted standards, but actually these standards, you have adopted them, the countries have adopted them, the workers, the governments, the employers from all around the world have adopted them. Now, it is true that ratification is in the case of many of those standards still lagging behind, and lagging behind more on certain continents than others. If you look at ratification records for example, European countries, you would see that they have ratified out of the 190 ILO conventions, they have ratified often very many more than 100 of them. If you look at the ratification record on other continents, it may be lower. However, ratification is also not everything, because once these standards have been ratified, they also need to be properly implemented, and this is also not always so obvious, so evident in terms of application also. So there are definitely very many challenges out there. Now, in terms of the very, as you know, I depicted the situation out there because the international labor standards, they're divided into two main categories: the fundamental ones, if you wish, and those that are more technical ones. Social security conventions fall on the technical side, so they are, but those that are fundamental, meaning those that relate to child labor, forced labor, discrimination, and freedom of association, these four groups of principles, they have been under the spotlight ever since 1998, when the ILO Declaration for the fundamental principles and rights at work was adopted in 1998, and ever since these issues have been constantly placed under the radar and under the spotlight in terms of international monitoring, and if you wish to look at what the situation was, what the problems were in the countries. And so basically, thanks to this in focus on these fundamental principles and rights at work, there has been a very noticeable move towards more ratification, better application, and so on, thanks for the last 20 years. So we should also look at the glass as half full also, in terms of what has been happening in the last 20 years. But it's true that the other half remains empty. So we should also focus on what's happening, even if the glass is half full, it's not yet full. So we need to look at what can be done in order to look at also. We have the fundamental things like non-discrimination, equality on the labor market, and so on. But the technical side, which is the social security side, is as important as these non-discrimination and the fundamental principles. because this is basically what workers are going to use when they get sick, when they get pregnant, when they get old. And so these are beyond the principles. These are very concrete things that the human right to work, human right to social security is getting concrete through these benefits that are being provided. Now, to come back to this idea again, because it's worth stressing. I mean, the importance of coordination of the public policies when you want to tackle discrimination and lack of social protection. Why? Because social protection alone cannot compensate everything we know exists in our societies in terms of discrimination, in terms of lack of equality of opportunities between men and women. So we need to tackle this on all these fronts, as also Maya stressed. And we cannot rely on social protection to simply redress some of these shortcomings that exist in the labor market, that exist in our societies. So we need measures to both. Social protection is both a tool, but also to act on these things, but also result in terms of mechanism to compensate and to address some of the discrepancies, some of these inefficiencies, and some of these challenges. So, but if we focus on measures that promote decent work for all, social protection being part of decent work, we would end up having much less problems at the end also. What I mean is social protection is at the end of the chain. We also have to look at the beginning of the chain. And here, of course, you as parliamentarians, it is very important, especially as women parliamentarians. I remember being in, I think it was in Cameroon, and addressing also an auditory made of women representatives of the informal economy. And they said an expression that is since then been in my head, saying, when sleeping women wake up, mountains move. And I think in your case, I mean, taking the lead in terms of public actors in order to promote increased ratification and implementation of these internationally agreed principles and rights is going to be key. Your national parliaments are the ones that are going to that can have an impulse, can be the spark in order to initiate such ratification processes. National parliaments know ILO very well. National parliaments, every time a convention or a recommendation is adopted in Geneva, you're the ones as parliamentarians who receive them in order to through what we call the submission to the national parliaments. Every time they get adopted in Geneva, they appear in front of you in order for you to take a decision what to do at the national level with them. So we definitely, in the case of social protection questions that we, with Maya, we work on, we are definitely committed to supporting countries in terms of ratifying, providing countries with assessments of the national law and practice as compared to the requirements of ILO conventions providing for the minimum protection in terms of social security. And we do that on a regular basis. We also advise what kind of reforms are being implemented, and we assess the reforms against the principles that are established internationally in ILO conventions and recommendations on social security. So this is all measures that we try to promote in countries and to facilitate and to support whenever there is interest in the ratification. As you saw, Convention 102 has so far not been very widely ratified at the African level. At the level of SADC, it's even less, because most of the ratifying countries are from French-speaking Africa. But we really hope that there is going to be now, with the COVID and putting social protection and social security at the center of the village, so to say, in terms of its importance. We believe that there will be very many new ratifications of this Convention 102. As you may know, the International Labour Conference this year had a recurrent discussion at the ILO in Geneva on the social protection and social security, especially in light of the COVID pandemic. And one of the key measures there was to launch a worldwide campaign to increase the number of ratifications of Convention 102, which provides for the minimum standard of social security. And we are now designing the campaign, seeking for allies, seeking for forums to promote the convention and to engage with countries in explaining why this convention is so much core, as it was the one in which in the 50s first set what the principles of governance, of administration, of financing should be for social security, set the minimum levels of protection that should be achieved. And since then, although it has something like 60 ratifications to this date, it has been really, really key in how national social protection systems have been designed. So we believe that there is much to be done in the future in terms of promoting its ratification in the future. And one of the means is, of course, the campaign and launching such comparative assessments in the countries to serve as the basis for the dialogue. What is the situation in national law and practice as compared to the minimum requirements that exist in international conventions and recommendations, in particular Convention 102. But Maya, maybe you can complement. Sorry, I took too long, and then I didn't mention the toolkit and everything that can be found there. I think we copied the link in the chat.
I will not speak too long because we're much over time. I just wanted to do justice to the honorable member of Angola and her question regarding the slide on the number of ratifications. Those are indeed the countries that have ratified Convention 102. So there are 59 countries to date. And as regards how can a country go ahead in terms of ratifying Convention 102 and what can the ILO do? Just to repeat and reiterate what my colleague Krum said, we stand for your full support in this process. We can support you in undertaking this study to compare how the national legislation and practice compares to the provisions of Convention 102, support you in undertaking a tripartite workshop to discuss the conclusions of such a study. We can support capacity building exercises to demystify the provisions of Convention 102, whether it be specifically for parliamentarians, since it will be the parliamentarians that will adopt any law for the ratification of a new standard, or it can be for social partners, or it can be for other government members. And we can also support you in all the procedural activities. These requests can come directly to us, or they can come through our colleagues that sit there in the regional offices. And we stand ready to support you in whichever way we can. And already in terms of demystifying a bit of these standards, we do encourage you to have a look at the toolkit that we have developed, because there's a good amount of information there regarding this ratification process, and maybe giving some ideas of what's the value added of ratifying, not just the procedural, but the added value, and what do you find in these standards. So with this, I'll end here. I know we're over time. Just to say that it was indeed a great pleasure to be invited to this. And we hope it was as enjoyable for you as it was for us. Thank you very much.
May I take this opportunity to thank both of you again. We have really benefited from what you have taught us this morning. Having said that, it's now time for the other presentation. And well, honorable members, we'll now move to our second presentation, entitled Informality and Social Protection in African Countries, a forward-looking assessment of contributory schemes which will be joint presentation by Mr. Dennis Monteiro, who is a Social Protection Technical Officer at ILO based in Luanda, and Mr. Lorenzo Mancin, who is an economist working for UNDP, also in Luanda. Madam and sir, please, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Ronald, may we have the last presentation on the screen, please?
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Boa tarde. I'm really glad to be here with all the honorable members of the regional Women's Parliamentary Caucus meeting. It's really an honor to be invited here. I'm Lorenzo Mancini, I'm economist at UNDP Angola. I will do a presentation jointly with ILO, with my colleague Denise Monteiro. I don't know, Denise, if you want to briefly introduce yourself as we share the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Lorenzo. Honorable Chair and all honorable members of the SADC Parliamentarian, it is a privilege and an honor to have this opportunity to share some of the results of this joint study between ILO and UNDP. Very quickly, to present myself, I am the Social Protection Officer from ILO that is based in Luanda, Angola, and I'm managing in Luanda social protection programs with a strong focus on capacity building and also policy reform. And we work jointly with the Angolan government and social partners. So as Lorenzo said, this is since this is a joint study, we have decided that it would be a good idea to have a joint presentation between ILO and UNDP. So Lorenzo will do the first part, I will do the second part, and then Lorenzo will do quickly the recommendations. Thank you very much. Over to
Thanks a lot, Denise. So I'm going to share the screen. Please confirm that you can visualize it.
We see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So again, as Denise mentioned, our goal is to contribute to this meeting by presenting some experiences of African countries that introduces some specific initiative to extend social protection to the informal economy. So the presentation is structured in three simple sections. First, we will share with you the conceptual framework behind this UNDP ILO joint study. Then we will go through the details of some key experiences from African countries. And finally, we will draw the recommendations to have some dialogue with all the honorable members of parliament. So what is the conceptual framework behind the study? So first of all, it's key to see that the informal economy is very heterogeneous. So not all people in the formal economy are on the same side or on the same situation. This picture represents basically the idea that we can see a different structure and different situation within the informal economy, where some segments, especially contributing family workers, home workers, are predominantly women, and they are usually and unfortunately at the bottom in the formal economy in terms of low earnings, but also high risk of vulnerability and poverty. I see that I had some connectivity issue. I'm back again. So the main message here is that gender inequalities need to be considered when we look at the informal economy, and social protection, as we will see, is very relevant to try to address these disparities that women are facing in the informal economy. The second major idea that I want to share here is that when we look at our societies, basically, and this distinction between formal and informal economy, we have several groups within the informal and the formal economy. So our study shed light on the missing middle. What we mean by missing middle is that we often have formal people who have good jobs and they earn some stable income, and on the other hand, very vulnerable groups that sometimes are able to receive some social assistance, for example, in terms of cash transfer. But then we have the middle group with thousands of people, most of the time they're more than a half of the informal economy, that are in a situation of vulnerability, and they're not, they don't fit in social assistance. So they are in informal.
Yes, he is having some technical issues. Denise, is there any way for you to go on with the presentation, or?
Sorry. Yes, I can go on, but I think Lorenzo is back.
Yeah, pardon. I think you can. I will give you the floor, Denise. I think you may go on. I was trying to just summarize the conceptual framework that we need to consider. On one end, the extension of the social protection floor by increasing progressively the minimum standards for social security embedded in the Convention 102. And on the other hand, the extension in terms of guaranteeing the access to essential healthcare and minimum income security for all, guided by the Convention 202. So this is our view for the ideal world in the medium and long term. So I will pass the floor to Denise to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So you will be continuing sharing the screen. Okay. So basically, this next part of the presentation is to present some African countries' experience. And the study cases that we will be sharing are just 3 experiences from other that we have picked from the study that show emerging practices in the extension of social protection to informal workers in African countries. And I think we have selected this country experiences because it can give us an overview of different design features that are emerging across the region and trying to this difficult group. Next slide, please. So as you can see on this slide, it is very clear that sub-Saharan African countries have the highest share of informal workers, being the countries in red and dark red close to 100% of the population working in the informal economy. Please note that this is also countries that has a big part of the population living in poverty and facing extreme vulnerabilities. And with the pandemic of COVID-19, these vulnerabilities have become even more pronounced. Without access to social protection that provides the necessary cushion against shocks, and daily wage laborers and market vendors, domestic workers, they will have limited means to cope with economic, social, and health impacts of this pandemic. Next slide, please. So the first case study that we will be sharing with you is Tunisia with the Protect Me program that targets and is adapted to female workers, informal workers in the agriculture sector, that provides healthcare, work-related injuries, and pensions. It's also important to mention that the healthcare part, it's seen in this program as an incentive for workers to adhere to this program. This was a program that was developed in partnership with Tunisia Telecom and the Social Security Institutions, CNSS, and contributions are made using mobile money transfers with an app that has voice recognition that will allow that women that cannot read still use the phone to make their contributions and their payments, and also will help them to not spend in a lot of time traveling to Social Security office to register and make this payment. It is a scheme that that recognizes the limited contributory capacity of rural female workers, allowing much lower minimum payments that can be paid on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis because they have irregular earnings. Contributions are set to a minimum of 35 cents, and the scheme aims to collect $7 per month per beneficiary. As beneficiaries are hard to reach, this scheme relies on ambassadors to collect registration data from rural women, including their national ID number, birth certificate, Social Security registration form, and the certificate of agriculture activity. It is important also to say that this is a scheme that is set by law. Next slide, please. The program in Rwanda, it's Ejo Enza pension plan. It is a pension plan that it's also set by law. And the scheme responds to a need of people working in the informal economy who do not want to see their money put away for 25 years. And therefore, this scheme has a dual function of savings, but also a pension scheme. The scheme is defined as a contribution rather than a defined benefit scheme, so that contributors can receive benefits that are linked to the amount they have contributed. The scheme also has a high flexible contribution structure where contributors can make contributions and payments at any time, and any amount can be saved. Once a person is 55 years old, as opposed to 65 in the formal sector pension scheme. The savings are converted into a pension, automatically indexed to inflation. And if at least $4,200 US dollars have been saved, they are also able to convert 40% of their saving to start a business, to construct a house, or pay for children's school fees. In this example, we can see that the government have set several incentives to keep contributions and to attract more people to the system. For example, they give a co-contribution from the government if a member has saved $60 per year. They can also give a provision of special life and funeral insurance benefits that are subsidized by the government for those who have saved $75 per year, and they give free health care for 3 years if contributors are managed to save a minimum amount per year. This is also an example that is taking advantage of technology to reduce barriers to access, meaning that they also use telephones to make payments and also to pay contributions. Next slide, please. We're going to Kenya example. Kenya example is the Mbao pension plan. It has emerged as a saving scheme among the informal workers. I think most of the African countries have social protection, have informal schemes of social protection. And this is a clear example of how these schemes can be turned into a formal scheme. It was emerged from informal workers from the Jua Kali sector, which basically means hot sun, and refers to those who work outside the streets or in the markets. Before the Mbao pension plans, they had only four major pension systems, but only for the formal sectors. So here with this plan, contributions are not mandatory. So no penalty is charged for not contributing, meaning that the contributions are completely flexible. It can be made by week, per month, yearly, with a minimum of 20 cents per dollar per day. Payments are also using technologies. They are done by phone using M-Pesa. And the scheme has gives also some incentives to join and continue contributing to the scheme, because contributors can enjoy tax exemption at the point of exit, and also allow contributors to request their savings as a lump sum after 1 year of cover. The scheme is run by a provident fund rather than a pension fund. Benefits are given as a lump sum and not annuities, which will not provide regular income for old age. But I think it's also important to notice that Kenya is one of the few countries with a universal pension for all the elderly, meaning all the people above 70 years old, of $20, which can provide some income security for this age group, but also for people with this age group in the informal sector. Next slide. So on the next slide, the objective here is to basically sum up a bit of the role of the state in extending social protection to informal workers. As we can see on the examples before, we can see that the state plays a very important role in realizing the human right for social security. So basically, the state is responsible to first develop strategy for the extension of social protection, and that will involve collection of information in the organization, structure, characteristics, and needs of the country's informal economy. Because in this sense, it's important to collect statistical data that will enable the definition of policies and programs that will respond to the current needs of informal economy workers. It is also very important that the country carries out a participatory evaluation and process, looking at what exists in terms of social protection, and also look at what are the gaps in terms of coverage. And here we can look at recommendation 202 and Convention 102 to look at the social protection floor. I think it's also important to conduct studies that can also look at willingness to contribute to the system, and also and to look at the habits of this group before designing a strategy. It is also a state responsibility to create an environment, an enabling environment for the coverage of previously uncovered workers, creating the legal framework that will ensure that no one is left behind. These laws and policies are also powerful tools that provide state institutions with a legal mandate and a budget to allow citizens to claim their rights. It is also important to adapt the financing of social protection schemes to the situation of informal workers, because international experiences has shown that social protection schemes must be adapted to the specific needs and the situation of the informal workers, if they want to have a greater chance of success, because the majority of the informal workers, they are poor or in risk of falling into poverty. They have a variable and uncertain income. They have high levels of self-employment, and it's also gender segmented, putting women in the most vulnerable forms of self-employment. I think it's also, the study also makes clear that the state also has a role of simplifying and adapting contributions to social economic conditions of the informal economy due to the characteristics of this group. So it is important to ensure that contributions are relatively affordable, looking for and allowing for single payments, co-contributions from the state, and also look into alternative relations to co-finance worker contribution, particularly when promoting gender equality. For example, care credits funded through the states are also a way of establishing greater gender equality and pension benefits, as they generally either allow for contributions to be made by the state on behalf of the person taking time off to provide care for a specified amount of time. The state also needs to actively facilitate access to social protection schemes, bringing the social security branches closer to the contributions, because for this group, the self-employed workers, time is money, and this is literally their motto. As we've seen in the Tunisia example, they, for example, use ambassadors to support with their registration, but also countries that, but there are also other countries that They use cooperatives and associations that are closer to the workers that can also collect contributions for their associates, but also they can also sign collective agreements. And finally, the state can also ensure compliance and incentives through monitoring and evaluation process that will allow adjustments to the system whenever it's necessary, so that the system is always open to allow more workers from the informal economy. And also to build trust through good governance and transparency of the system. Trust can also be strengthened through social dialogue that should be constant between the state and representatives of the informal economy workers. Lorenzo?
Thanks a lot, Denise. So I will try to draw the major recommendations that are coming out from the analysis from UNDP and ILO. First point is when we see the policies related to the transition from the informal to the formal economy, we need to look at them in an integrated way. And here is a relevant role of the Parliament, but also of the coordination across the ministries from a multi-sectoral approach, because informal economy and social protection need to be connected, for example, with education policy, with the policies for employment and vocational training, but also, and first and foremost, the gender equality. As we have seen, there are examples of countries that decided to put at the heart of the informal economy strategy the initiatives to address the gender inequalities. The second major point is that to promote an inclusive transition from the informal economy to the formal economy, you need to include incentives. The examples that we have seen from several countries reveal that you need to extend the social security to the most vulnerable groups, but you also need to consider specific initiative, for example, to simplify this process, for example, by using mobile money or digital financial services. But also it's relevant to include other incentives so that especially women and girls can be included in the social security if they get some benefit. For example, some access to microfinance or other kind of business support services. The third point is more related to the cross-cutting issue of gender inequality. When we think about the informal economy and social security, it's absolutely relevant to coordinate both contributory and non-contributory social security systems, but always having in mind the vulnerability of women and girls. Fourth, the examples of these countries that we have seen in the UNDP ILO study also highlight that is of utmost relevance to adopt a simplified social protection regime for the self-employed workers. This is because in the informal economy, most of the people working are self-employed, on account workers mostly, but also domestic workers. And this is a very vulnerable group because of the instability in their work, because they have relied on themselves, and that's why we need to adapt the social protection regime. So this is a major recommendation for those countries that are considering to promote the transition to formal economy. Look at your social protection regime and consider what is the condition for the self-employed. And this is something that is very clear from the example that we have seen from Tunisia, Kenya, and Rwanda. And finally, something that is absolutely key, this is the social dialogue, which means keep a continued conversation and open and transparent dialogue with all the actors that are involved in, meaning the representatives of the informal economy, meaning representatives, of course, of government and parliament, but also from the private sector, from the academia, so that you can listen also to their situation and try to improve the conditions and adapt the social protection regime to their needs. With these major recommendations, I would thank you all for the attention, and me and Denise are open to any question and try to address your comment in the following session. Thank you so much. And again, thanks a lot for the opportunity given to UNDP and ILO to present the findings of our joint study. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Monteiro and Mr. Machin, for this eye-opening presentation. Really, we've benefited. I will now once more open the floor for our last question and answers of the day. Honorable members, you may raise your hands and pose your questions about this last presentation, or give any comments and observations you may have about all the presentations we've had today. You have the floor. Having said that, may the Caucus Secretariat assist to track raised hands, please.
Host, kindly turn on Lorenzo Mastini's camera.
Thanks. I'm trying to switch it on, but it seems that the host stopped. Okay, thanks a lot.
Honorable Shali, we have no hands so far.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. I have few things maybe to Mr. Muchin. You will also, Machin, if you may, also, please excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name well. The informal sector serves the largest number of our working population. From Tanzania, and I'm speaking from Tanzania. And this is agriculture, informal business, informal mining, manufacturing, and construction. Because of the informal, it is so difficult to address the problem of the workers' coverage to social security schemes. Because today they are here, tomorrow they will move to another station. But then the World Social Protection Report by the ILO in 2020-2022 shows that more than 4 billion people lack any social protection, and that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the problem. However, the SADC protocol on employment and labor imposes the obligation to state parties to ensure, among other things, decency of work, social protection, and comprehensive regulatory framework are in place. I think we should continue to strive to implement the measures as SADC partners states if we are to address the problems of the COVID-19 associated with the informal sector area. The only challenge for all of us is how are we going to take relevant measures in view of the COVID-19 threat? How? Is there a model strategy that can be drawn from Tunisia and Kenya so as to help other African countries?
So thanks a lot, Honorable Representative from Tanzania. I will briefly give my overview, and then I think Denise may complement with this. There's a big question on how. Among the major recommendations, we have highlighted the needs of social dialogue. This is very relevant because each country has its own context, historical, institutional, cultural context. And with the social dialogue, you can interact with the representatives from the informal economy and listen to them, listen to their needs. First, what is their understanding, for example, on the current system of current regime of social security? They know what are the major regimes. They know how to be integrated. Are they satisfied also with the current regime? Maybe the contribution, the fee they need to pay is too high, or they may not have information about that. So the social dialogue is the starting point to see what is the perception, especially from women who are working in the informal economy. Most of the time, if they don't adhere to the social protection regime, there are some factors behind that. Maybe on one hand, lack information, but most of the time is that the current regime is not adapted to their needs. And so to understand their needs, you need to promote the social dialogue, and can be done by, for example, we will actually, UNDP and I will organize very soon a roundtable to discuss the challenges related to social protection extension to the informal economy. So we will organize this week a roundtable to listen to the different representatives of the informal economy, but we have also invited, of course, representatives from the government, from the private sector, to understand that. And then based on the social dialogue, you can look at some experiences that you don't need to replicate, of course, but you need to see what are feasible and can be adapted into your context. And all these examples reveal that the social security regime has been simplified for specific categories of informal workers, meaning that they need to be not only a reduced fee to be included in the social protection regime, but most of the time it's also an issue of simplifying the process and integrate the transition to the formal economy with other policies. For example, especially for just if you may switch off. Yeah, thanks. No, just to finalize the point on social dialogue, that from the examples that we have seen in other countries, there has been a simplification in the social protection regime, especially for the own account workers. Because, for example, when women are working, let's see, in the urban markets, their time is precious, because if they spend time to go to several offices to get different papers at the same time, they cannot work. So there is no incentive for women and girls to leave the urban market to go to 3 or 4 different offices to get the documents and then go back a few days later to do another process. So you need to simplify. You need to bring the services into the market and also simplify them. And why not including digital solutions, but also reducing the fees. So it need to be simple, need to be accessible, but first of all, need to be based on their needs. So this is my major answer on the how. But I know that my colleague Denise would be glad to compliment me. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I think Lorenzo pointed out several points that we have already discussed on the presentation, and that could lead us to, for example, designing programs that are more oriented to the needs of the the workers of the informal economy. I wanted to also to link to the question that I just saw on the chat about the impact of technology. I think as Lorenzo mentioned, one of the, and I also mentioned on the presentation that time is money, the digital solutions and technology can really facilitate the process for these workers in the informal economy. Of course, this technology needs to be adapted to the different contexts. For example, the Tunisia example, they had to do an app that would work with audio because population in that area, communities, they are mainly illiterate. The examples have shown that using more and more technology will definitely facilitate the payment of contributions, the receivement of benefits, and also a way to interact with the social security institutions. I think it's also very important to look at the role of communication. For example, many of the workers in the informal economy, particularly in the rural areas, they don't even know what social security is. They don't know the benefits. They don't know their rights. So I think it's important to look also in terms of communication, massive communication, to work also with the organizations at the community level and local levels that can try to engage the population and particularly the workers in the informal economy to adhere to these systems. But of course, they will not adhere to the system if the systems were not designed taking in consideration their characteristics, their needs. So I think it's also very important to look at a diagnosis, looking into what are their specific needs, what makes them not contributing to the system. Maybe it's the level of contribution. For example, it's quite unfair when a worker that has an employer, the employer pays one part of the contribution, but the own account worker needs to pay the whole amount of the contributions. And for some time, for people that are earning daily amounts per day, and it's basically a let's say it's a very small amount for their daily subsidy, and they basically cannot take 11%, 50% of this amount earned per day to give to Social Security. I think this is it. I don't know, I think we are receiving more questions.
Yes, there are questions in the chat. Secretary General has asked, cross-border training and provision of essential services and infrastructure are key to the informal sector. What should parliaments do? And there is a third question from Secretary General that says, what are your views on the notion of powerless places and placeless powers that affect informal sector and women entrepreneurship and regional integration? Any recommendations for women MPs to pursue in advocacy?
Thanks, Honorable Representative. I may, Denise, I don't know, I may try to address the first question, at least to start with. Thanks a lot for your question. Very interesting question. So on the technology side, we have seen globally that due to the pandemic, the world of work has changed, and mostly with these remote working opportunities, thanks to the digital solutions. However, for most of the people in the informal economy, this benefit or changes in technology have been relatively small, mostly because informal work, especially in the sub-Saharan African countries that we see, have little access to some digital solution, and even the connectivity to the internet that is now growing in the business. But this has not been a major limitation. Actually, we are seeing, especially from Angola, there is a vibrant entrepreneurship, especially from the young people, and some of them are tapping into these opportunities related to the technological change and innovation. For example, by using digital application to run or expand some businesses in the micro and small enterprises, especially. So the picture is again heterogeneous, because not all the people in the informal economy have the same access to the technology or the same knowledge on using the technology. But I would say that overall, with the COVID pandemic, what we are seeing is that some specific groups within the informal economy are tapping into this opportunity. And one of them is the digital business. So the way, for example, vendors in urban markets have been able to connect with the customers through digital application, or even very simple websites, or using applications that are now widely used even with the mobile phone. The other direction has been the expansion on the digital financial services. So the use of mobile money applied to the informal economy. So I would say that the COVID pandemic has changed significantly the use of technology in the informal economy, but of course the results are mixed, because it ultimately depends on the access to both the connectivity, but also to the literacy, digital literacy. That's why one of the major recommendations is to promote the digital literacy together with the financial literacy, because you need both of them now in the COVID, in this new normal of COVID. You need to foster both the digital and the financial literacy. And at the same time, another important way to strengthen the opportunities for informal worker is to promote the access and use of digital financial services. And for example, this is the case of Angola, where we are seeing a notable expansion of the use of mobile money. We are at the incipient stage, but the government has promoted the adoption of digital financial services. And I think that together with strengthening the capacities of the informal worker, this can bring very important results, especially for those women and girls working in urban markets that are often selling products to people who are now more willing to use this digital and mobile money to make their payments. So it's also a way to expand their business. And actually UNDP will work on that to support government in the transition strategy to the formal economy. We have a new project with the government of Angola to try to foster the use of digital financial services, mostly mobile money, to have access to the market, but also to business and financial services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muchini. And now we are still on time. May I take this opportunity to thank all of the presenters. And before I conclude our third and final debate session, I now invite Mrs. Gladys Mutukwa, who was invited by the SADC PF to share some words with the caucus, words of inspiration for leadership on the gender agenda. Mrs. Mutuka, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Honorable, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, Mrs. Mutukwa is unwell. She has gotten in touch with us during the meeting to let us know that unfortunately she will not be joining us because she is unwell.
We wish her a quick recovery. And having said that now, may I take this opportunity to invite Honorable Member Maria Joanne Sabrina Toa from Mauritius to present closing remarks. But before she come on floor, may I take this opportunity as the Vice Chairperson of this caucus to thank our Chairperson, Anne Maria Mbilambangu, for letting me chair this meeting today. I understand Maria could not join us today, but then she gave me the permission to chair the meeting. I've enjoyed the position and I've learned a lot from all of you. So I hope this will go on record that Shirley, member of Parliament from Tanzania, was happy to chair the meeting on 19th. Having said that now, I'm inviting Honorable Maria Joanne Sabrina to present closing remarks. The floor is yours, Honorable Maria.
Honorable Shali, it will be Honorable Mosena from Lesotho giving the closing remarks.
Okay, I was just reading from the agenda. So who is presenting the closing remarks, please?
It's Honorable Mosena from Lesotho.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Mosena. And in fact, to be honest, in the beginning and while we were reading the in the morning, while going through the papers, she was very active on correcting all the 17 minutes. And she was really taking us page by page on correcting the minutes. Welcome, Honorable Mosena.
Thank you very much, Chair. Honorable members, Secretary General, distinguished guests, let me take this opportunity to thank ILO, UNDP, Mr. Krum, Mrs. Monteiro, and Mr. Mancini for their brilliant presentations. Let me assure you that the information that you have shared with us today will be very, very useful in our future endeavors as members of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, the Women's Caucus, but also as representatives of our constituencies at our national parliaments. Honorable members, we are being presented with the opportunity to start legislating for women's rights in the workplace in a time of great challenges. It's true, but also a time enriched with new ways of thinking and mitigating difficulties, a new thirst for change and evolution. This is what I hope we take away from this meeting, a meeting that we have just had. Women are an undeniable and irrefutable contributor to our country's economies. whether in the formal or informal sectors, working daily and mostly doing so much under less than acceptable conditions, without the dignity that civil or legal rights convey. Women in our region are very much more often engaged in informal activities such as microenterprises or small-scale farming, which are activities that can fall through the cracks of the most surveys on employment. That needs to change, honorable members. Dear guests, let's keep in mind that regardless of the fact that our countries are foreseeing the implementation of development of policies that leave women behind, we're still left with opportunities to turn things around. Women definitely need carefully and specifically directed social protection programs, and they need to be encouraged to dive into the employment waters of the birthing industries in our region. We need, therefore, to continue empowering these women who are equipped and trained to work in the industrial sector. But we should also not forget those who work in other sectors. I have hope because I know for a fact that women are involved and employed. At the same time, I recognize that we have much work to do as women, because the reality is that women's work is at greater risk of mismeasurement. We have clearly seen that from the presentations that have been brilliantly made today. And I suppose we have taken so much with us that will allow us back home in our member parliaments to align the measurement regarding women's work. This leads me to say, yes, women in the SADC region are hard workers. We are not always taken into equal account as men are, despite our hard work. And we stand here as representatives of all the women in this region, yourselves included, honorable members, because you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your hard work. The UN Women and other development and gender-focused institutions and organizations call for urgent investments in the care industry, including childcare, taking into account the fact that women are more likely to drop out of the workforce to provide care, a service which will most likely be unpaid in most, if not all, cases. But women do it diligently, and we must continue to fight and make this unpaid work recognizable. We can still work towards downturning the consequence of COVID-19 pandemic of decreased number of women in the workforce and in school, with persistent advocacy, and by keeping our eyes turned towards new tools and techniques of surrounding the obstacles towards promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. I thank you, Honorable Chair, honorable members, ladies and all the guests. Merci beaucoup. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mosena. And this brings us to the end of the meeting. And I'm thanking all who attended this meeting, and also the Secretariat who worked as a team to make it possible. There being no further business, the meeting is adjourned until next time, God willing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.